Lumpy Umpka by Douglas B. Whitley, Jr. Once there was an Umpka named Lumpy. He hated being wet and always carried his umbrella. Of course, he lived in a dry and dusty land where it rarely ever rains, but you never know, he would always say. His grandfather, Lumpy Umpka, would chide him, "Why do you always carry that umbrella? It never rains here." His grandmother, Lumpy Umpka, would upbraid him, "Oh, child, it is simply not the fashion to carry an umbrella. Umkas will think that you are different, odd, not quite the thing." But still, Lumpy carried the umbrella because you never know. He was speaking with his mother, Ulefeme Umpka. She was a very kind and loving Umpka, and she told him, "Lumpy, it is quite all right to carry your umbrella if you want." "Oh, thank you, Mama Ulufeme, because you never know." His father, Ulysses Umpka, said to him, "Son, it is quite all right to carry your umbrella if you want. It is a useful thing. It shields you from the sun and wind. Folded up, it makes a very fine walking stick, and will pick up rubbish left by foolish and thoughtless Umpkas along the way. If you are attacked by the wild warthogs, you may use it as a club for defending yourself. If you are assailed by the slippery slither snakes, you may use it as a sword. You might even use it as a boat if there were a big river to cross, which of course there isn't, just a small stream that runs through our village. Most importantly, you might even use it as an umbrella, because after all, you never know." Every day Lumpy Umpka went about with his umbrella. When he picked woggle fruit from the woggle fruit tree, he carried his umbrella. When he played sniglippets with the other Umpka children, he carried his umbrella. At Umpka Academy, he went to every class with his umbrella. Umkamatics, Umkalish, social umkies, even playing the umkazoo in the umpic class, Lumpy had his umbrella. You might have guessed, Umkas are very unusual creatures with very unusual habits. They are very shy. So shy that you won't see one even in this book. When they sleep, they cover their eyes with their long fuzzy ears. When they stand, they often cross their legs. But the oddest thing about Umkas is what they do when something touches their heads. When they walk about and something touches their heads, they look straight up into the air with their long furry noses, very much like a trunk, not the luggage kind of trunk, but the elephant kind of trunk, with their long furry noses stuck straight up in the air. You see, they think when something touches their head, it might be a bumka tree with a bumka fruit, which is their very favorite. The bumka tree is very rare, and its fruit is even more rare. So when something touches their heads, they don't want to miss it in case it is a bumka tree. If a snurb lands on their heads, they look to see if it is a bumka tree, and the snurb falls off and flies away. One of the favorite tricks of Umkas is to touch one another on the head, so that when the other Umka looks up with their nose in the air, the one who touched him tickles him under the chin. One day, Lumpy Umpka felt something touch him on the head, and he looked up, nose in the air, to see if it was a bumka tree. But it was not. It was something wet, and it went inside his nose. Indeed, it was a lot of something wet. It was rain. Of course, he put up his umbrella. He was so happy he had it with him because, after all, you never know. And certainly this was the occasion for an umbrella. Soon he heard coughing and snorting and sneezing and wheezing and crying. You see, with the rain coming down, all the Umkas' noses were pointed up, and the rain was getting into their long noses as they all walked around with their noses in the air. Lumpy Umpka ran to his mother, Ulufeme, whose nose was in the air, and put his umbrella over her. She called out to his father, Ulysses, and he came coughing and sputtering with his nose in the air and got under the umbrella. Soon Grandfather Grumpy staggered up, very weak and very wet, and got under the umbrella. Grandmother Uppy Umpka was nowhere to be seen. They searched and searched for her, and finally they found her, soaking wet, but perfectly safe. You see, her nose was out of joint, which of course happens to Umkas, some more than others, so it wouldn't go straight up in the air. But she was across what could only be described as a river, caused by all this rain, and it ran right down the middle of the village. As quick as he thought, Lumpy turned his umbrella upside down, put it in the river, and jumped in. He used his long and useful trunk to paddle across and rescue Grandmother Umpka from the raging water, bringing her safely to the other side. Then Lumpy Umpka waddled around rescuing the other family and friends by holding his umbrella over their heads or ferrying them across the swollen river until he had rescued his entire village, although there were some in no danger because their noses were out of joint just like his grandmother Umpka, but they were very wet. He got them all under the big shelter in the middle of the village, safe and sound. As Lumpy looked around to see if there were any others to rescue, he saw that the rain had forced the slippery slither snakes out of their holes, and they were slithering to higher ground, which is where he had put all the rescued Umpkas. He took his umbrella by the handle, and he began to defend the other Umpkas. Slippery slither snakes are long and thin and a bit slimy. They have long tongues, sharp teeth, and red eyes. The chief of the slippery slither snakes rose up before Lumpy Umpka and slished at him. Slippery slither snakes make a sing sound. "Let us pass," he slished. "You shall not," said Lumpy Umpka, and with that the slippery slither snake chief struck at him with his sharp teeth. Lumpy held his umbrella like a sword and began to parry and thrust until the slippery slither snake chief was forced back with all the other slippery slither snakes into their wet slimy holes, which were even more wet and slimy with the rain than they were before. Just as the last of the slippery slither snakes was slithering down their holes, Lumpy Umpka heard the howl of the wild warthogs. They were also disturbed by the rain, but they knew too that with the rain all the Umpkas would be looking up with their trunks in the air, and the wild warthogs could sneak in under their noses, as it were, and steal all the food in all the Umpka houses. They came in a woj, which is a gathering of wild warthogs, to attack the Umpka village and take all the food. Lumpy Umpka rushed out to meet them. Even though he was a bit afraid, he wanted to protect his helpless village from the wild warthogs and their thieving ways. With his umbrella held fast in the middle, he dealt the lord of the wild warthogs a mighty blow right on his head. Lumpy Umpka struck him right on the big wart that grew between his eyes. The lord of the wild warthogs started to cry, and then his eyes crossed, and suddenly there were two Lumpy Umpkas. Lumpy Umpka struck all the other wild warthogs right between the eyes, and they saw lots and lots of Lumpy Umpkas looking fierce and armed with umbrellas, an army of Lumpy Umpkas. The wild warthogs began to howl in earnest and rushed back to their dens, never to attack the Umpka village again. Lumpy felt quite fierce after that and waited a bit for a new attack to begin for something else, but there were no more attacks. It was at that moment he heard the tiniest of sneezes that could only have come from a sniffle-whiff. Sniffle-whiffs are very small creatures, all fuzzy with soft fur. They roll up into a ball when they are afraid or disturbed. It does not protect them. It is just what they do. Sniffle-whiffs come in many colors. There are red sniffle-whiffs and blue sniffle-whiffs and green sniffle-whiffs, and the very rare purple sniffle-whiffs, which are very unusual indeed. Lumpy Umpka heard the sneeze, and he looked down. The sniffle-whiffs were so small and so close to the ground that the water had risen and made them all very wet and soggy. They had all caught colds and were sneezing the tiniest sneezes one has ever heard. Lumpy saw that they were in danger of drowning, or at least sneezing all their fur off, which would be very embarrassing to them because they are very shy also, and he opened his umbrella, turned it upside down, and began to gather all the sniffle-whiffs into it. He quite filled it up with sniffle-whiffs, all sneezing and shivering and rolling into a ball. He carefully carried them to a place of safety and rolled them out to dry. He kept going back and forth and gathering the sniffle-whiffs until he had gotten all of them into a warm, dry place where they would be safe. When sniffle-whiffs are warm and dry and safe, they hum. It is a soft, comforting sound. Many Umpkas would keep sniffle-whiffs as pets in their homes, keeping them warm and dry and safe so the sniffle-whiffs would hum the Umpkas to sleep every night. As they began to hum all together, everyone else began to feel warm and dry and safe as well. Lumpy was soon surrounded by the humming and the trumpeting of all his family and friends that he had rescued from the rain and the slippery slither snakes and the wild woodwalks. He was very pleased, but very tired after all that work, and he just wanted to get back to his home and take a nap, perhaps after a little Bumpka fruit jam on some Umpka toast and listening to the humming of the snifflewifts. With the rain, the Bumpka tree sprouted Bumpka fruit, but none of the other Umpkas could get any because of the rain in their noses. Lumpy and his family had with the other Umpkas, especially the ones whose noses were out of joint, enough Bumpka fruit and to spare, and so they shared what they had. Soon the rain stopped, and the dust swirled again, and the snifflewifts kept humming. But from then on, every Umpka carried an Umpka umbrella wherever they went, because, after all, you never know. The end. Here's some activities. If you have a book, there's a red umbrella on every page. Can you find it? What does Lumpy Umpka say whenever anyone asks him why he carried an umbrella? What do Umpkas look like? Can you draw a picture of one? Is Lumpy afraid to be different? Are you afraid to be different? Lumpy carries his umbrella so he will always be prepared. What are some events you can prepare for? The story of Lumpy Umpka came into being very late one night after I'd been speaking at a function in Alabama. It was nearly midnight, and the rain was pouring down in buckets. My wife and I were driving back to our hotel when we saw a sign through the rain pelting the windshield for the town of Wetumpka, Alabama. But in my mind, I began to wonder just what a wet Umpka would look like. And so the story was born. And I hope you enjoy it, because after all, you never know. Thank you.